Hey everyone. I have a couple examples here of the ButWhy tool that I think we can use to get to some policy options for addressing health inequities. I'll walk you through both of those right now. One here uses I'm starting with a sort of more of a social determinant in Riley County. It's also one that's housing related, which I know a lot of communities are facing. And this one is a little bit different format, um, just for kicks here, and starts down here with a specific health outcome. Um, and this one just happens to be low birth weight among Hispanics in Riley County, which we know is true. So I think I'll start with this one. Let me blow it up a little bit, and I'll kind of walk you through how I went through this. Now it's already all laid out here, but um, you could imagine in our session, starting with just something down in the corner or at the top, whatever the issue or problem is, and then you branch out from there. And so let me walk you through. This one's a little messier, so I'll walk you through this. So here we're starting with low birth weight among Hispanics in Riley County. And you just start asking the question, well, why do we see that? And I actually had to do a little digging. I looked up causes of low birth weight to get us started here. Figured that poor nutrition would be one of those things. Age is a factor. Substance abuse or use is another factor, and there are others. So the thing to notice about this layer of the ButWhy, this first round of ButWhy, is that there's a bunch of different factors here, and we could explore all of those, right? To think about, well, why is age related to low birth weight, or why is age a factor in our county related to low birth weight among Hispanics, right? Is it only young women who are giving birth to you know low weight babies, or what's the deal? And that would take up, if we explored all of these things, it would take up a whole page, right? So everything that you see on the page is really just a continuation of looking at this factor here, which is poor nutrition. So I think the first time I did this one, it got big real fast, and so I was like, well, I think we just have to focus in on one for now, just to demonstrate the tool, and you can take it back home with you and do some of that exploring on your own. So poor nutrition. That's one of the causes. And then you say, well, but why? So the next layer here looks at that, and you could attribute that to low food access. You could attribute it to, nutrition education. Just knowing what healthy foods are, what unhealthy foods are, making good choices. I chose to go with the low food access one here. You could just as easily imagine actually getting to nutrition education and ultimately coming to some kind of system change, more likely, or maybe a policy change, but certainly a system change. Like a more robust nutrition education program or something like this. So, but if we go with low food access, then that kind of gets us into, the food desert kind of frame of mind here, and say, well, why do we have low food access? The next layer of ButWhy, okay, well, maybe it's got something to do with cost. Maybe it's got something to do with transportation. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that we don't have a grocery store in our, community, right? And then you could go another layer out. Well, why are what is it about cost? Why do things cost so much? And you say, well, maybe it's not that they just cost so much. Not of course, high prices might be part of that, but it also raises the point that well, it could be people's wages too. Like maybe people just don't make enough. And once you start talking about wages, I think um, once the farther out we get here, I think the easier it becomes to start seeing policy solutions. I mean, my mind immediately goes to like some kind of living wage, policy, or at least in our community, it looks we're trying to. There's groups trying to pass like wage floors on companies that use public economic development dollars, right? Something like that. High prices. I'm not a whiz here in thinking about what kinds of policies might come in handy in this particular area. Um, but um, it's a lot closer to a policy than you were down here, right? Like poor nutrition, age, substance use and abuse, and those kinds of things. Um, and then you could talk about transportation. Maybe maybe it has something to do with a driver's license. And again, I think when the people in the room who experience this, when the people who experience this are in the room, right? This process and these questions, I think, are a little easier to answer. I think I can imagine. I can also imagine having like your whole leadership team, or at least a multi-sector sort of group of people, kind of going through this exercise. Identifying specifically like what's going on in their community. Like this is really a hypothetical here, but certainly there are more people in each community who have a better idea of like what's actually happening than I do, or that we do. And so this gets us there, right? And if it's if we're talking about, again, if we're talking about transportation and driver's license, or maybe there's no public transportation, now we can start thinking about things like, well, is there some kind of system in place that's um, intentionally or unintentionally discriminating against Hispanic people getting driver's licenses, or um, you know are we not making investments in in public transportation, or do people not feel safe walking in their neighborhood? Um, and you can imagine um, starting to talk about community development and infrastructure, and these kinds of things. And so I'm hoping that you can see more policy in here than I am sort of communicating here. But this is the tool that kind of lays out these possibilities. And I mean, in this case, since it's not my community, these are really more of like hypotheses about what might be happening here. But again, I think if you have experts in the room from the community, then this is more fruitful right off the bat. So that's this one. This is just one example, and we did 1, 2, 3, 4 iterations of why. You can imagine doing another one up here as well. So the other one is a little bit more simple, and this one, let me blow that up a little bit. So this one is the ButWhy tool for a problem that is more social determinants focused. So this is the housing related one. I specifically picked out rental cost burden. When people talk about affordable housing, people are usually saying that the housing that's there, people can't afford, right? They're spending too much of their income on housing, and that's taking away from all kinds of other things. And probably in a lot of cases, at least in Riley County, it's forcing them to live in unhealthy, unsafe homes. And it's like all of this is correlated with all kinds of other issues, right? Like landlord relations, code violations, rights violations, and these kinds of things. And so let's start here with rental cost burden. There's 54% of people who rent in Riley County technically can't afford it, and that's especially true for Hispanic families. They spend on average more. They are more cost burdened than other racial and ethnic groups in Riley County. Okay, so why? Well, you can go immediately, in at least a couple of different directions. One, you could talk about wages, like if we're, low wages. Yeah, I can't afford it because I don't get paid. I talked to a guy named Rudy yesterday, one of the flood victims from out here. He's like I got all these people telling me like what I should be doing after my house just got destroyed, and um, where I can go get help and whatever, like what I need to do. He's like this would all be easier if I just got paid more. Like if I got paid what I'm actually worth. And so wages is on the table. And then we've got high housing costs um, in Riley County, anyways. Prices are disproportionately high compared to other places, and you could say, well, why is that? Um, well, if you went the market sort of route, you could say in this second line of but why, well, maybe it's got something to do with low supply and high demand, right? Supply and demand. Um, it's also the case that in Riley County, and we have with the military base, we have artificial inflation of prices, or so the local wisdom suggests, meaning that military personnel and families who live off base, they actually get an allowance for renting or housing allowance in general, I guess. And the military sets that at the whatever I think the median fair market rent is or something like that. Um, so you've got all of these transient populations, including students, but also military who are coming in, who don't really have like negotiating power because they have to come in and they're all competing in like this frenzy of signing leases, sometimes from like you know other states or other countries, and they have a housing allowance, at the fair market rent, and they're gonna, a lot. They don't have a whole lot of time to search around and find the perfect place, and um, so what happens to at least some extent, we don't have tons of good data on it, but they will landlords will set their price for their rental property near this allowance because they know that they can get that even though the quality of place and safety of the place that they're offering might not be worth that in the free market. So it's really a disruption to the free market. And you can imagine, some policy or at least systems options coming out of this kind of critique or analysis of the problem. Um, and and then let me jump back over here. So I just stopped there without it getting, so it didn't get too messy. Um, low low supply, high demand. We could ask, well, why? Well, why aren't developers building more low income housing or affordable housing? Well, there's a lower return on investment there, right? Like we got all kinds of construction happening in Manhattan, Kansas, but it ain't, for the most part, low income housing. Um, there's lots of there's there was just a ton of rentals, being built, 5 miles outside of town, 600, rental units out there. But that's 5 miles outside of town. So now you have to start factoring in transportation costs, and these rents are not necessarily affordable. They're 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 just more affordable than what you would find in town. That's pretty much it. Um, but if we're using like a definition of affordable as 30% of one's income, and we're taking into account transportation costs, like it's really not clear that they are more affordable. There's just a bunch of, there's some investors who are building that, that apartment unit out there because they know there's all of these slumlords in town who are not going to fix their place up. So they're just pushing them out of the market. And there was nowhere else to build. And it's cheaper to build out there. So so again, back to the point, right? Like, there's just a lower return on investment if you're building housing that is intended to be affordable or for low income populations, right? That's why you just don't see it that much. You do, however, see that when there are, tax incentives or, some kind of tool, financial tool in place, um, to balance that out for developers. And that starts to get us into some policy thinking here as well. You could also, ask why again and get to, high construction costs and taxes. And that could be an area for some policy discussion. You can also talk about, the bird's eye view, the profit motive here. Why is it that, a developer has to make money off of my housing, right? Which we know that we all need. And so then this gets you into exploring, nonprofit options, or at least more. You could think of cooperative, housing. You could think of, CHODOs, community housing development organizations, which we have here. You can think about community land trusts, which we're exploring in Riley County right now, right? And those are, I think all of those are either policy, mostly policy, and some systems changes there as well. When you look at what they're doing in Lawrence, Kansas, with their land bank, or their community land bank or land trust, they're actually they passed a sales tax to fund that, right? And so that's a policy, option as well. And so yeah, so this ButWhy gets you, closer, or at least it gets you closer to thinking and exploring what policy options might be. One thing that I'm noticing, in writing these and in talking about them, is that, the policy option isn't obvious unless you already know about it. And so I think the document that you came up with is going to pair nicely with sort of this kind of tool that, allows you to think about, prioritize like some of these, contributing factors, and then make connections between those and policy options. So I'm going to send this to you here, and we can chat about it tomorrow. And if you want another one on something else, then let me know and I can make it real quick. It's really not that hard. So, all right, see you soon.